Greetings. My name is Frank Hawkins, and I am the Director of Advocacy and Community Engagement for an organization called AIDS Delaware. And what AIDS Delaware is an organization, we address the issue of HIV in the state of Delaware. And I have been doing that for the past 23 years, working with individuals, as well as really, focusing on issues that are impacting our community here in the city of Wilmington and in the state of Delaware. And I am truly honored today to be the host of today's show, selected by yours truly, Tanya Williamson, who is the Chief Visionary Officer for Married to the Ring, and truly see it as an honor and a privilege to be the host today. Here joining me today is my good friend and colleague, Lena Queen. Just to tell you a little bit about Lena, Lena has a wealth of knowledge in a variety of areas, particularly sexology. Get that, sexology, right? Where they do that at? Right here on today's show, right? So I'm not gonna steal her thunder. She can introduce you much better than I can. So Lena, in your own way, introduce yourself, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for Tanya for inviting me to be part of this magnificent event and being able to help individuals to knock out those giants as we help you at Married to the Ring. Again, I am Lena Queen. I am a clinical somatic sexologist, a board certified sexologist. And in a nutshell, what that means is I am actually proficient in the study of sexuality and gender. And I've been doing this work for about 7 years, but as a therapist doing this work for 20. Mm-hmm. So I'm really excited to be here today.
Yeah, and listen, so you heard it, right? She said she's a board certified sexologist. And I'm sure we can get more into that at some other point, but know this part, right? She knows something about sex, and sexual identity, sexual orientation, and all that good stuff.
Absolutely.
And on today's show, we're going to be, as she just mentioned, we're going to be tackling some giants that really are plaguing marriages these days. Myself being married now going on 30 years, right? I love my wife. We've been together, ups, downs, ins, outs, in-betweens, all that kind of stuff, and we still together, right? So marriage is about continuing to thrive, and so grateful for it, because it's something that when you look at where we are in today's times, COVID-19 has really kind of stressed, created trauma in some marriages and other things. So we're going to talk about 3 things today, right? That should be looked at, right? And it may be sensitive to some, but notice that we're not going to open up any wounds, right? And if we do, know that we have qualified professionals that are able to help with the healing process. Am I correct, Lena?
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So we're ready to dive into this. Stay with us, stay hyped, get excited, get a pen, write some notes, take some information down, because this is going to be truly a learning environment, and it's going to be a learning engagement process. So the first thing, Lena, that we want to kind of talk about is, let's talk about one of the things that are plaguing some relationships, marriages these days, and that is desirability. So COVID exposed a lot.
Absolutely.
Right? I'm in the house with you all day now. Right?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about that.
Absolutely. So today we're going to talk about desirability in three areas. Just as you said, we're going to talk about embodiment, which is really how we live in our body, right? Like our authentic self. We're going to talk about desirability as far as behavior, and like how does that show up in our everyday interactions and in marriages, how does that actually show up? And then we're also going to talk about healing. So when you're struggling with desirability and that connection to self and your partner, we're also going to talk about like what can you do when it comes to healing as well. So to answer the question, what is desirability? Desirability is really just the action of attraction. It is like, what do you want? And in turn, because it's a reciprocal relationship, it's about what wants you, right? I think what's also important to think about desirability is both sexual and non-sexual. I love to think that sometimes when we think about desirability, a lot of times people feel the pressure to think about sex only. And when we think about sex, we think about sexual intercourse. But desirability is so much more. Desirability is really about that reciprocal relationship to our core needs and our core desires.
Oh, okay. So, interesting. So, I have a scenario that I'm going to paint,
Okay.
right? And I want to get this scenario correct, so I'm going to refer to my little cheat note that I have. Audience, bear with me, right?
Sounds
so
good.
here's the situation, right? For more than a year, a couple has been experiencing the lack of emotional and sexual intimacy. The partners have expressed not feeling desired nor connected to each other and taken for granted. Both partners express the desire to want to have more sex, but often struggle with initiating sex due to that lack of connection and out of fear of rejection. So I guess hearing that scenario, like, how does desirability factor into that?
One of the things that we have learned as a result of COVID and really having to be with each other for a lot of hours and a lot of days is that we have taken things for granted. Relationships, marriages have rhythms and systems and schedules. And so a lot of times people take for granted what we do as a task as an example of emotional intimacy. And then the gratification of that task and the feeling, the connection of that emotional intimacy usually leads to some type of sexual intimacy, right? So in that scenario and in that situation, what COVID has shown in over extended period of time is like people feel disconnected, right? Because their rhythm, their schedules have been disrupted. So now you have to do something that you probably haven't done since you started dating, which is like learn each other again. And then
Say that one more time. Just say that one more time.
One of the things that you have to do over a while is learn each other again. Right? If you've been with your wife for 23 years, to know her as the woman she is now versus the woman you first met, right? That's what COVID has put a spotlight on.
Wow.
And in that spotlight, one of the giants that marriages struggle with is like desirability. You also mentioned rejection. We take for granted that people want us, or our insecurities can show up and we feel like we're not wanted because we're out of rhythm. So we're less hesitant to initiate, especially if I've been taught as a woman, right, that I'm not supposed to initiate. There's some sexual shame that could go with that.
Wow.
So desirability shows up in how we engage with each other. And what we're going to do today is continue to talk to people through these three things about how you can improve your relationship to desirability.
So how would you say then, and thank you for I think you just raised a whole lot of valuable points, just in a lot of the reading that I've done. Two people are now in the house together, working, they're working from home. You have the children at home, so that's another factor that we'll discuss at another show, right? But we're home together, we're working, I see you consistently, right? And so that desirability, so how does that play into a factor of, am I still sexy, especially in light of research showing that people have gained, they call it the COVID-15, right? So we're home now, we're eating more,
Right.
maybe properly.
Right.
So
yes, absolutely.
Right.
So weight change, body changes,
talk to that for
health
us.
changes.
Yeah.
So one of the things that research actually shows, especially when it comes to emotional intimacy, is that women require emotional intimacy and sexual intimacy is a product of that emotional intimacy. So when we're talking about heterosexual relationships, women have been shown in research that they want to feel emotionally connected to their partner, and that almost is like a reward system, like a validation system to say I have permission to be sexual in a non-shaming way with my partner. So one of the things that we really wanted to remember is that relationship styles and love styles will show up differently in marriages. And being able to pay attention to those things becomes very important, and that's where desirability shows up.
And would you say, so what does that emotional, right? Because we're talking emotional now, right? What does that, describe what that might look like?
Being seen and being heard, right? So going back to not being taken for granted. One of the things that in my practice we talk about is the imago communicative technique, right? Being able to mirror what your partner says, not just understanding, not what you think the partner says, being able to validate what your partner says, not saying that you agree with what your partner says, right? And showing some empathy and compassion, right, in your relationship. So emotional intimacy really looks like that. It looks like validation. It looks like emotional it looks like empathy, and it looks like being able to like mirror back and just repeat what is being said. That will really help, couples understand like whether or not they're missing the point without feeling like I'm not doing enough, right? Men can feel like no matter what I do, I'm not doing enough. That's not it. It's slowing down the interaction process to really increase the emotional intimacy.
Cool. So, and one thing that I'm just going to say this, and before we wrap up this segment, is that one key part is communication.
Absolutely.
And if communication has not been there,
absolutely,
this will be something very hard to do because we haven't communicated. So now we struggle communicating.
And that's a good segue into the next section, right?
Yes, it is.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much.
Yes.
Right, we're going to go to a break. And we're going to
right.
come back with our next segment. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Good.
Drop Squad Kitchen, you know we the freshest. Get your body, mind, spirit on point with these veggies. It's by any greens necessary. You ain't know? That's why the chef game legendary around the globe. Soul food make your whole crew vibrate. So roll through the Drop Squad to get the life plate. Unapologetically healthy food is wealth. For you investing in yourself, come to our place. Drop Squad.
All right, so we're back. Thank you so much for joining us for this next segment. But before we get into our next segment, I want to give Lena an opportunity to take a minute or so to just give a recap of what a person may have missed who's just joining us.
Absolutely. So what we just discussed in the first segment is what is desirability, and under desirability is the embodiment of our needs and our wants. Understanding what can impact desirability in marriages, and like what are some of those giants that people end up struggling with, which include emotional and sexual intimacy. And also talking about some of the research about like what women need in order to feel emotional closeness, and what's the relationship to sexual intimacy. And then like, that great segue you just did where you're just like, it's about communication, and really talking about the parts of communication and how that's actually going to go ahead and move into our next section, which is behavior.
Right. Good transition. Thank you.
Appreciate
it.
it.
So that's our next section, right? We're going to talk about behavior. So to lead off this discussion for this next topic, my first question is, give us not a definition, but what is the correlation between desire and sexiness?
Desire is the emotion sexiness is the embodiment, right? Sexiness, remembering that desirability is both sexual and non-sexual. So it's one thing to desire something, it's another thing to feel desired, but how does that actually show up in our body is sexiness. There was research done by Dr. Tracy Gilbert who talked about Black sexiness in the community, and she came up with 8 different ways of understanding sexiness. And the one thing that she talked about is the erotic self. And the erotic self consisted of our relationship to our behavior, our relationship to others, our relationship to ourselves, erotic energy, consent, our affect, our outward expression of emotion, and I just drew a complete blank on the other 2. But what is shown is that sexiness isn't just an abstract thing of understanding, it's actually something very, very real. And for individuals, regardless of your ethnicity, it's something that we really need to be able to pay attention to in our marriages.
Hey, listen, that was a whole lot, really, really powerful information. But I guess my next question, just hearing all of that, and thank you very much for the research. I'm all about research, right?
Absolutely.
And I think our audience needs that to know that this information is verifiable and can look it up. But what can a person do to show desirability? What can a person do for that whole feeling of, I need that desire?
It really comes down to sexual confidence.
Okay.
So the other thing that research actually shows is that people who have healthy sex lives have a tendency to have sexual confidence. So there's an awareness of who they are, how they show up in their lovership, like the care and compassion they show for themselves and other people. And then using sexual confidence as a skill in order to communicate their core needs and their core desires.
So what would a healthy sex life, desire, what does that look like?
It looks like the ability to manage the uncomfortable. And in managing the uncomfortable, it's about, can you set boundaries? Can you actually have a conversation with your lover about, here's what I want, right? From a place of, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, and I'm not saying you're not doing these things,
right,
but as a lover, I am also evolving, right? And here's what I'm showing that turns me on. Here's what I'm showing that I like. And here's what I'm showing that I don't like. So sexual confidence translates into that sexual communication, and being able to have boundaries and to express those boundaries is a huge part of that.
So 2 terms that I've identified thus far: sexual communication, right, where we are communicating our wants, needs,
yes,
and our desires.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's really significant because it creates a healthy sexual relationship.
Absolutely.
Am I correct?
You are correct.
All right, let's listen, ladies and gentlemen. We getting something said here right now, right? I hope you're loving this discussion, because it really is a discussion that most of the time you really don't hear about in our cultures, right? Because sexuality is not a big topic.
Absolutely. We have a tendency to come from a very sex negative space.
Very good. So what can a person do to feel sexy?
The one thing, first, be gentle with yourself. I think a lot of times we feel like that these are things we're supposed to know, instead of allowing ourselves grace and compassion to learn. So first, activate some compassion and be gentle with yourself. The next thing would actually do is, like, what is some self-exploration? You know, like, how are you getting to know yourself both as a lover of things sexual and a lover of things non-sexual? That is absolutely really important. And then being able also to check in with that sexual confidence and sexual communication, like, where are you with those skills? And then, like, what are the gaps? Like, what are the things you need to do in order to increase those skills?
Because my background is in behavior, behavior is not something that happens overnight.
Absolutely.
Change of behavior.
Absolutely.
Right? So what is the process? What is the process of changing from, we didn't communicate sexually before. How do we start this process?
you start this process, and I think that's some of what we're actually going to talk about in our next segment
Oh, okay.
too, is like how to start this process. But I think, again, going back to that self-evaluation, and like, if you want to ask yourself a really simple, to keep it really simple, what is your relationship to pleasure? What is your relationship to pleasure? You know, and that, how does that question make a person feel, make you feel? How does that make you feel if you had to ask your partner that question, your lover, your husband, your wife? You know, what is your relationship to pleasure? And being able to, again, assess your willingness to be able to explore that relationship.
So now we're moving into the world of communication, assertiveness, and all those kind of words. Is this a discussion that should be, I guess, tread upon carefully?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because trauma, I think what we talked about earlier, right?
Okay.
Trauma is something that exists. And trauma is an impactful event that is going to affect your ability to relate to yourself and to other people. So that's why I say be gentle with yourself, because I do recognize that we all have a significant lived experience that can be variety. There could be times where your partner, your wife, didn't share things with you because it was too vulnerable. So being able to have that assertiveness, being able to have that way of communicating with your partner, it's going to be really important to understand that trauma can show up in these conversations, and to make space for that.
So, and I guess in your experience, can it be uncomfortable?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think growth happens without it being uncomfortable.
Okay.
Right? So I think when you make room for the uncomfortable, and I say this as a therapist, like, our job is to champion the uncomfortable, is to create space for the uncomfortable. So what does that space look like is absolutely important.
Right, because I think sometimes what can happen is that there's so much fear. So now I've learned this new information,
Yes.
and then there's that fear, excuse me, of having to go talk to my partner about what I've learned, because now I'm not sure of what the unknown.
Yes.
What is their response
Yes.
to what I'm saying?
Yes. Yes.
Because it may come across like I'm not desirable. No, that's not what I'm saying.
Absolutely. So that would go back to what we shared earlier in our first segment,
Right.
is being able to mirror what your partner is saying, right? Being able to show some empathy to what your partner is saying, and being also to validate that's your partner's experience, which is something that may not have anything to do with you. Like, we can't personalize our partner's experience and their relationship to pleasure, but we can support them in developing a healthy relationship to pleasure.
Because all of this leads to new horizons that the relationship will go to.
Absolutely.
Am I correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
So-
healing is what's next.
And the healing part. Exactly. That
Absolutely.
part.
Yes.
That part.
Yes.
Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, look, that is the end of this part. This part. Right? We have more to come. We're going to take another break and we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Drop Squad Kitchen, you know we the freshest. Get your body, mind, spirit on point with these veggies. It's by any greens necessary. You ain't know? That's why the chef game legendary around the globe. Soul food make your whole crew vibrate. So roll through the Drop Squad to get the life plate. Unapologetically healthy food is wealth. For you investing in yourself, come to our place. Drop Squad.
So we're back, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to continue our discussion. We're going to expound a little bit more on what some of the things that we've already talked about. But here's the thing, right?
Yes.
Marvin Gaye wrote a song. It's called Sexual Healing. I'm not going to sing it, right? But that's what we're going to talk about. We want to talk about the healing aspect, right, of all of this information that has been presented. and what needs to be done, right? I think we've talked about it somewhat.
Yep, in the last
but we
section.
just, let's get a little bit, let's go a little bit more. Like, what are some things that a person can do or a couple can do to get that confidence to have this discussion? Let's start there.
Right. So just as we talked about in the last section, right, being able to activate compassion, self-compassion, being able to understand your relationship to pleasure, and most importantly, being able to have support, right, both relationship and individual support. Healing, ing, is ongoing because it's a lifestyle, right? Healing is not just a momentary experience of a good feeling. Healing is a lifestyle. It's continuous. So I think what's really important to understand for couples is that when you're engaging in healing, it's an evolving, never stopping process. And you'll have more flows than ebbs, right? Like there are ebbs and flows that happen in everything in all places. But when you're talking about sexual healing and increasing your emotional and sexual intimacy, you're going to have more flows than ebbs because you're going to be actively engaged in a lifestyle that is going to help you understand your lovership and activate that sexual confidence and activate that sexual communication in that place and space that's not shaming, that's not harmful to you or someone else.
Okay, so now, I'm sure this is new information that has been presented. If you have been here from the beginning, it may have been new information, it may not, I don't know. Nonetheless, here's what I'm going to ask you to do for our viewing audience. In a methodical, systematic way, right? Outline what that process of building the sexual confidence, building upon the healing, what are the actionable steps that one could undertake?
One of my favorite books is a book by a Tibetan monk, and he talks about awakening the sacred body. And he talks about 3 emotional intelligence, emotional awareness skills that people need to have. To have a relationship to stillness, to have a relationship to silence, and to have a relationship with awareness.
Okay.
So when we think about mindful practice and mindful sex, which has been a really big thing in the last few years, that's really the foundation to mindful sex and mindful intimacy, is understanding methodically, like being able to, 1, do your self-evaluation, right? And then really look at how do you spend your day? When you get up out of the bed, when you wake up and your eyes are open, what's the first thing you do, right? Do you have a practice of gratitude? Do you grab your phone? Do you grab your partner? What do you do? When you get out of bed, what's the very next thing that you do, right? Like, how are you taking care of yourself, which is really important. So going back to what Dr. Tracy Gilbert said about understanding healing the erotic self, it's important to understand your relationship to your everyday, like the foods that you eat, right? Like, the things that you watch. If you're going to be methodical in healing, then you're going to be methodical in all things and not just have these sweeping grand gestures of self-care. So,
I don't mean to cut you off.
No.
So it sounds like the first thing that I'm hearing is that when God allows me to wake up to see another day of His grace and mercy, I need to give thanks.
Absolutely.
And do something, even if it's turn to my partner, because you said don't grab the phone. Good morning. Great day.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Neuroscience research also shows that a practice of gratitude actually helps change the nervous system. So that way, when you're talking about trauma responses and like how we respond to our trauma, we are less likely to respond in the ways or can change the ways we respond to our trauma by invoking a practice of gratitude. And a practice of gratitude, again, being something that is embodied. We feel at a soul level, we feel at a spirit level, and not just at a superficial level.
Yeah, and I've also heard, read things, and I practice something every morning where I write down 5 things that I'm grateful. I started December 1st, so I'm really proud of the commitment. And every morning since December 1st, I write down 5 things I'm grateful for. 4 things in one person, right? And I noticed that from a physiological, mindful space, I feel much better as I go on about my day. So I guess one of the things that you can do is really start the practice of feeling gratitude. Because gratitude is like the mother of all other
Right.
emotions.
We have thousands of emotions
Yeah.
that we can experience. And it's not to say that a practice of gratitude, being mindful from a trauma responsive standpoint, that depression and anxiety can't impact those things. And we may not feel like that we want to be, gratitude, which is why it's important to seek, professional support. But it's really, it's a practice of gratitude has been shown to be really transformational for folks.
So I heard you mention professional support.
Yes.
So is that something that should be involved or as an actionable item as well? So I'm going to be
Absolutely.
grateful. I'm going to practice. I'm going to seek out professional support to
Absolutely.
help build that sexual confidence. Is that what I hear?
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, understanding that support needs to be both and, not either or, both individual in addition to relational.
Gotcha.
Right? Because again, when I am supporting, couples in relationships, the one thing I always say is like, we can't do this work without you doing your work. Right? Otherwise, you just get to be on this hamster wheel where you just keep at the same place, or the changes that happen don't last very long. So again, healing, ing, is ongoing, it's continuous.
Yeah, and it sounds like, this is, since we're talking about a relationship, marriage is a relationship,
Absolutely.
right? If one is healing and the other is not, then the scales may not be balanced. Is that
It
correct?
can absolutely happen. So one of the scales, when you think about what we're going to measure, compassion fatigue, right? The person who is engaged in their healing could experience compassion fatigue because they are supporting someone who may not have the capability or the desire to engage in their own healing. So, you want to be mindful of compassion fatigue. You want to be mindful of how compassion fatigue informed your ability to hold space for your partner, informed that, remember going back to that rejection, right? Right, being able to say, like, does compassion fatigue also, like, inform, like, oh, I don't want to be rejected either, or why bother, because they're
Right.
going to say no,
Right.
so, and compassion fatigue can impact our hope. And we just talked about the practice of gratitude. There's a relationship between gratitude and hope. And when you're thinking about depression and anxiety, one of the things you want to be mindful of in seeking that, and that's why seeking professional help is so important, because sometimes those things we need help outside of ourselves.
Cool, right. And, and so I guess as we kind of wrap this up, so we have a couple of things. One, practice gratitude, right? Whatever that may be for you. Waking up, writing down, offering prayer, writing down, what I'm grateful for. However you do it. Or do you read something that gives you motivation and inspiration to go about your day, And then also I heard you mention seek out support,
Yes,
right? Whether it be individualized or relational,
absolutely.
right? Is there anything else that a person can do?
One more thing. So in relationship, in regards to your relationship to pleasure, so I have an activity that I have my clients do. And the activity is name 2 things that per sense, right? Your 5 senses, there's more than 5 senses, but with your 5 senses, think of 2 things that you like or that you desire. One list will be sexual and one list will be non-sexual, right? And that way, again, that's part of that self-inventory that you can do, and you have something very concrete and tangible that you can process with your partner, with yourself, and with your professional support.
Okay, so inventory.
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 Self-reflection.
Self-reflection. Self-inventory is about, and if inventory is not a good word for you, you can put it on a positive, negative type scale. But
Absolutely.
take an inventory and take a look.
And what you desire.
Exactly.
What's your relationship to pleasure, both sexual and
Exactly.
non-sexual?
So, ladies and gentlemen, that is, today's show. I thank you again,
Thank you for having
Lena,
me.
for, giving us that wealth of information, and dispensing information in a way I feel, and hopefully you feel the same way, that was easily digestible. It might not sound comfortable, but hopefully it's something that most people can do. Again, we've been in with each other for like 2 years, right? 2 years we've been.
Yes, COVID.
So now,
going on 3. Yes.
like you've probably learned something about your children, good and bad. You probably have learned something about your partner, both positive and negative, right? And there's also that piece, like, because you got to stay out of your head.
Woo.
Huh? Woo!
Yeah,
Stay out your head,
stay.
right? Because you get up in your head and your head will tell you, like, I ain't even going to go there, right?
Yes.
But anyway, again, big shout out to Tanya Williamson as the chief visionary, for this Married to the Ring. It has been my pleasure to be the host. I thank you for tuning in to today's show, right? And please, by all means, stay tuned because Lena and I are going to come back. We have more to discuss. So when we had our little sit down, there's so much that we can discuss that we just want to bring to people to help make people better in a holistic way.
Absolutely.
Right? Body,
Absolutely.
mind, and spirit. So ladies and gentlemen, again, I thank you for tuning in. I'm going to sign off with this. Have a enjoy your day, night, whatever it is. And listen, we're talking about building better people so that you can stay married to the ring. Have a great day.